evening. We are going to go ahead and get started with our Bible study this evening as we continue through our discussion on the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark. Real quick, as we get started, I just want to let everybody know that we will not be having Bible study next Tuesday night. It's becoming a theme. It's not intentional. But on Monday, the 2nd of March, will be our Purim party here at the synagogue, and that in and of itself is going to be a lot. So rather than us doing the Purim party Monday night and then expecting people to be back here Tuesday night for Bible study, we are going to forego Bible study in lieu of the Purim party next week, and then we will pick up with wherever it is we leave off at tonight on the following Tuesday, the second Tuesday of March. So with that said, we're going to open the word of prayer. We're going to go ahead and dive into our study this evening on Mark chapter 5. Avraham, Father of mercies, we worship you, Lord. We thank you for this time together. Father, we ask that as we dig into your word this evening, that you will speak boldly into our hearts and our lives. Father, that it'll be your word heard, your heart felt, that nothing of me will be involved except that which you've ordained for this purpose. Lord, I ask that you will move mightily in our midst tonight as we dig into this important chapter of the Gospel of Mark and bring to our hearts and our minds revelation of the character and nature and your love for your people. B'Shem Yeshua Meshachenu. In the name of Yeshua our Messiah we pray. Amen. As always, there is a microphone in-house. If you have questions or comments as we work our way through, just raise your hand, and we will make sure that microphone gets to you. If you're joining us online, just punch those questions or comments into the chat box wherever it is you are watching, and we will do our best to pay attention to those and interact with you as they come through. All right, Mark chapter 5 this evening is where we are picking up at, and so we're going to read kind of the first half, verses 1 through 20 for context, and then we're going to go back and start to dig into it a little deeper, verse by verse, contextual passage by contextual passage. It says, they came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. As soon as Yeshua got out of the boat, a man from the graveyard with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but the chains had been ripped apart by him, and the shackles broken. No one was strong enough to tame him. And through it all, night and day, at the graveyard and in the mountains, he kept screaming and gashing himself with stones. When he saw Yeshua from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. Crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What's between you and me, Yeshua, ben El Elyon?" I'll learn to read one day. "I'm warning you in the name of God, do not torment me." For Yeshua had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Yeshua began questioning him, "What is your name?" And he answered, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He kept begging him not to send them out of the country. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside nearby. The unclean spirits urged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs so we may enter them." So Yeshua gave them permission. The unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the cliff and were drowned in the sea. The herdsmen ran away and told the town and countryside, and they came to see what had happened. Now they came to Yeshua and saw the madman who had the legion. He was sitting there dressed in clothes and in his right mind. The people were scared. Those who had seen it described in detail what had happened to the man plagued by a demon, and they also told about the pigs. And they began to beg Yeshua to leave their country. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been infested with demons kept begging to remain with him. Yeshua did not let him, but he told him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much Adonai has done for you, how he showed you mercy." So he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Yeshua had done for him, and all were amazed. All right, back to the first couple of verses. They came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. As soon as Yeshua got out of the boat, a man from the graveyard with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but the chains had been ripped apart by him, the shackles broken. No one was strong enough to tame him. And through it all, night and day, at the graveyard and in the mountains, he kept screaming and gashing himself with stones. So this account makes up the first half of Mark chapter 5, or more or less the first half of Mark chapter 5, but it really picks up at the end of what we read in Mark chapter 4 last week. Remember, it says that Yeshua and his disciples get into the boat. They're heading across the sea, and the winds start to roar. And as they do, the waters get crazy. The boat's rocking. The waters are coming over the sides of the ship. And the disciples go to Yeshua, who's fast asleep in the back after a long day of ministry. And they go to Yeshua and say, hey, don't you even care that we're all about to die? And Yeshua kind of looks at them like they're idiots, tells the storm to calm, tells the seas to calm, and everything's good. And this is where it picks up at next, where they are now on the other side of the sea, which was their intended location to land at. As we look at this, both here in chapter 5 as well as the end of chapter 4, what we're seeing is Yeshua revealing his power over nature itself when he calmed the wind and the sea, and then we see his power over the spiritual realm with what is about to happen in this narrative at the beginning of chapter 5. He and the disciples, as I said, got into the boat, fully aware that Yeshua fully aware that the storm was coming, and they traveled across to the Gerasenes. And the Gerasenes are a very intriguing area for him to go to, because what is one of the primary things, and we'll mention this again later, what's one of the primary things Yeshua continues to tell his followers and the crowds that he's teaching? I came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But here he's going to the Gerasenes, who were primarily Gentile, and in particular were Hellenized. They were very much fully in alignment with the Greek culture, with the Roman Greco culture, and in support of Rome itself. This area called the Gerasenes here is part of the Decapolis, which was a group of 10 Hellenistic cities through Jordan, Syria, and there was one or two that were sort of kind of on the cusp of Israel as well, but primarily through Jordan and Syria. This would have been on the other side of the Galilee, which would have been in what we now know as the territory of Jordan itself today. The text sets up some background and context for us regarding this demoniac. Demoniac, just a convenient word to use for a person who is possessed or oppressed or what have you with demonic spirits. And so it gives us some background, some context for what's about to happen as this demoniac meets Yeshua. What we see is that he's been dwelling in this graveyard among the tombs with an unclean spirit. And it's interesting that in the beginning it says an unclean spirit, but then later on through the narrative we find out that it's actually thousands of unclean spirits acting as one, if that makes sense. He was so strong because of the spiritual oppression. He was so strong that no one was able to restrain him, whether it was shackles and chains or anything else. Attempts have been made previously to restrain him and secure him with shackles, but he was so strong that he continued to break free. Because of the demonic spirit within him, throughout the night and day, he would constantly scream and gash himself with stones, which is safe to assume would torment those who lived in the region nearby. Whether the self-harm was induced by the unclean spirit or was self-induced in an effort to rid himself of the unclean spirit is not apparent in the text. It doesn't tell us that. It just relays to us that he was constantly gashing his own flesh, and kind of leaves it up to us to make assumptions one way or the other. But it is an important part of the story, because what we see is that the people in the village around it, in the countryside around this graveyard where he was, were terrified and tormented by his very presence, because he was constantly screaming in agony, because he was constantly hurting himself. And I would imagine them trying to chain him up was not just to protect him, but their attempt to protect themselves out of fear of what the progression of whatever this situation could become. Verses 6 through 7 says, when he saw Yeshua from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, crying out with a loud voice. He said, "What's between you and me, Yeshua ben El Elyon? I'm warning you in the name of God, do not torment me." This is a very important interaction to keep in mind, as we know from earlier interactions with the religious leaders and even sometimes with Yeshua's own disciples, that many were uncertain about exactly who Yeshua is. But this demoniac immediately ran to Yeshua, bowed down before him, and cried out, "What's between you and me, Yeshua ben El Elyon? I'm warning you in the name of God, do not torment me." While many men, and especially Jewish religious leaders who should have recognized the Messiah when they saw him, did not recognize him, this unclean spirit within the demoniac had zero doubts about who Yeshua is. He calls Yeshua ben El Elyon, which translates to the Son of the Most High God. So we realize right out the gate here that this demon recognizes the God of Israel, the one true and only God of all creation, and recognizes that Yeshua is the Son of God, that Yeshua is divine in and of himself. And out of fear of the one who will crush the serpent's head, the unclean spirit basically asks Yeshua, "What beef do we have?" and invokes the name of God to ask him not to torment him. Now, I say that about the one who would crush the serpent's head because this is what we read in Genesis 3:15 when the serpent tempts Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. They eat of the fruit. God comes and says, "Okay, well, the serpent, you're now going to dwell on your belly forever. You're going to be afraid of the woman, and her seed will crush the serpent's head." This is ultimately the kind of prophetic foreshadowing of what would occur in the future that we're still waiting for when Yeshua comes back and ultimately brings an end to the reign of the enemy of Hasatan here in this world. And so the demon that is possessing this demoniac, this man in the graveyard, is terrified because he recognizes this is Ben El Elyon, this is the Son of God, this is the Messiah, this is the seed of Adam and Chava who would crush the serpent's head. He's terrified that Yeshua is going to crush him. Does that make sense? If you're, and I only bring that up because I think a lot of times we overlook the fear that appears to be in this demon, right? He invokes the name of God to say, "Do not torment me. Do not torture me. Do not cause me problems." While the religious and political leadership of Israel did not recognize Yeshua's authority, this demon absolutely recognized and understood that he was a creature under Yeshua's authority. And that comparison is important because this is the overarching thing that we see throughout the Gospels, is that the religious leaders hadn't quite figured it out. They hadn't quite come into the understanding of who Yeshua was for many reasons, but for whatever those reasons were, they had not yet recognized Yeshua as the Messiah. And yet this demon, who is part of the enemy's army, is fully aware and accepting of who Yeshua is and of the authority with which Yeshua operates. Likewise, I think it's likely that the unclean spirit asking not to be tormented wasn't a request for Yeshua not to kick him around a bit, but rather was a recognition of his eternal separation from God because he was a demon. Verse 8 through verse 13. For Yeshua had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Yeshua began questioning him, "What is your name?" And he answered, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He kept begging him not to send them out of the country. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding in the hillside nearby. The unclean spirits urged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs so we may enter them." So Yeshua gave them permission. The unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the cliff and were drowned in the sea. So Yeshua interacts here with this unclean spirit, commanding it to come out of the man and asking the unclean spirit what his name is. Now, for an understanding of kind of the way, the pattern that this occurred, Yeshua commanded the demon to come out. Then the demon said, "What do we have against one another? You are Ben El Elyon, the Son of God. In the name of God, do not torment me." And then Yeshua asks, "What is your name?" All right, just setting that up for you. That's not the way it appears in the text, but this is why, particularly in verse 8, it says, for Yeshua had said to him, that statement for Yeshua had said to him is saying that this question that Yeshua, or this demand that Yeshua made, is why the demonic spirit responded to Yeshua in such a fashion, excuse me, in such a way as to say, what's between you and me, Yeshua ben El Elyon? I'm warning you in the name of God, do not torment me. And then after that, Yeshua says, now who are you? What is your name? I don't think that Yeshua needed the demon to tell him his name, right? Yeshua is God. He's omniscient. He's all-knowing. I don't think that somehow he had like a mental block and couldn't find the guy's name. I 100% don't believe that he needed this demon to tell him what his name was. I think this was more about his disciples witnessing his divinity and his authority over all things physical and spirit. That kind of goes back to their amazement at the end of chapter 4. Who is he that he's got control over the wind and the waves, right? Over these natural things. Now he's got command over the spiritual as well. The unclean spirit responds, my name is Legion, for we are many. The term legion comes from the Latin meaning thousands and referenced a Roman legion, which was an elite heavy armed infantry of the Roman military, and would have been anywhere from about 3,000 to 7,000 soldiers comprising this force. So the demon saying we are legion was saying that there are thousands of us, and that excuse me, still getting that cough out, and that those thousands were operating as one. And then this is why we see when he casts them into the pigs that a couple of thousand of the pigs end up dying. Verses 10 through 13, Yeshua had already commanded the unclean spirits to come out of the man, but was not, and this was not optional for the demon, but he kept begging to not be cast out of this country or this region, depending on what translation you're reading this from. And this is really important, and we see a sense of this in Luke as well. This had nothing to do with the physical region in which Yeshua and the demoniac were currently standing, which, if you remember from the beginning of the chapter, was the area of the Gerasenes. It wasn't that he was saying, hey, don't put me away from these people, right? But there was something far more intentional, something more of a spiritual reality occurring here. Ephesians 6:12, we read, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the worldly forces of this darkness, and against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. So this wasn't about the realm here on earth that this demon was residing in while he was in the body of this man suffering. He didn't care about whether he was with the Gerasenes or he was in the heart of Rome or he was in Ethiopia or whatever else. There was something far more intentional being said. The unclean spirits would have to ultimately find someone else or something else to possess, or else they would be forced into the abyss. In fact, in the account of this same event in Luke chapter 8, we see the demons ask the question in this manner from Luke 8:31. They kept begging him, Yeshua, not to command them to depart into the abyss. So they weren't worried about whether they had to go to some other part of the world. They didn't want to be cast into the abyss. In other words, they didn't want to be cast into hell. They wanted to still exist here. They wanted to still have their way with someone or something here on earth. At this point, a large herd of pigs were spotted feeding nearby, and the unclean spirit, who knew he couldn't win a fight with Yeshua, asked, send us to the pigs so we may enter them. Yeshua gave permission for the unclean spirits to do so, and immediately they came out of the man that they had been tormenting, entered the pigs, and then the whole herd of pigs, about 2,000 is what the text tells us, rushed off the cliff and into the sea and drowned. The fact that there were pig herders is a primary sign that the Gerasenes were in fact non-Jews. Pigs are not kosher, right? You couldn't raise them to eat them in Israel. So this is one of the prime things that points us to the reality that the Gerasenes were non-Jews, were Gentiles on the other side of the Galilee. It is also probable that since the pigs were unclean, again, not kosher, then it would have been favorable to Yeshua for the unclean spirits to then enter the unclean animals. There is a lingering, and by the way, that assumption that it would have been favorable was the demon's assumption, not that it would be assumed Yeshua would be okay with it because they were unclean, but rather it was the demon's assumption. There is a lingering question as to why, though. Yeshua is omniscient. He would have to have known the outcome before giving the permission, but he allowed it anyways. So why did he do this? Why did he let the demons go into the pigs? The animals were, after all, harmless, and they were the property of innocent bystanders. Some have even used this account as a moral argument against Yeshua. If he were truly Messiah and were truly God, then why would he have allowed for something so diabolical to have occurred? But as David Stern's Jewish New Testament commentary points out, God has permitted demonic expression with its evil consequences since the Garden of Eden. Job even asked why, and God indicated that his dealings with satanic powers are not to be understood fully by human beings at this time. Although some have suggested that the demon destroying the pigs was a calculated accident to create prejudice in their owners against Yeshua, which does appear to have been part of what occurs as we move further on through the account. So we don't know exactly why Yeshua allowed them to go into the pigs. This is the gist of what I just said. It doesn't make sense. They were innocent animals. Sure, they were unclean, couldn't eat them, but they're great garbage disposals. So why did Yeshua allow the demonic spirits to go into these pigs if he is omniscient, all-knowing, would have known what the pigs were going to do? Why did he allow this to occur? And the general answer is we don't know. We don't have to know, but we need to understand that the primary basis of this narrative, of this account in Mark 5, has nothing to do with the pigs. It has to do with God's or Yeshua's supreme power and authority over all things physical, natural, and spiritual. Does it make sense? Continuing on with verse 14. The herdsmen ran away and told the town and the countryside, and they came to see what had happened. Now they came to Yeshua and saw the madman who had the legion. He was sitting there, dressed in clothes and in his right mind. The people were scared. Those who had seen it described it in detail, what had happened to the man plagued by a demon. And they also told about the pigs. And they began to beg Yeshua to leave their country. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been infested with demons kept begging him to remain with him. Yeshua did not let him, but he told him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much Adonai has done for you, how he showed you mercy." So he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Yeshua had done for him, and all were amazed. Here we see that the herdsmen realized they just lost everything. Everything was gone instantly, right? Thousands of pigs, this is their livelihood. Whether they personally owned the pigs or they were herding someone else's pigs really didn't matter. They were now going to suffer significant loss. They ran off to the town, and the countryside nearby spread the word of what had just happened. And as is the case whenever Yeshua does something miraculous, many people come out to check things out for themselves. They came out and found Yeshua and the man who was formerly a demoniac and who had frightened them all for years, and realized the man was completely free of demonic spirits and was sitting quietly and fully dressed and in his right mind. Now, I don't know why it's at the end of the story about this guy that it decides to tell us that apparently he'd been naked before. It didn't tell us that when they were talking about him chaining him up and all this kind of stuff. But apparently his being fully clothed was a major part of the transition in the story of his life. The reality of what was being seen before them caused the people to panic in fear. The story of picking of verse 16, the story of the demoniac man being spiritually freed by Yeshua, along with what happened to the pigs, was being rapidly spread through the crowds of people. Most would assume that this man would have been possessed by thousands of demons for years, and who had been tormenting all the villages nearby, being set free, would have brought excitement and joy to the crowds, if for no other reason than that this man had been healed and fully restored. However, rather than joy, the people were greatly afraid. They heard what Yeshua did for this man, and they became fearful. It is likely that the fear was induced both by the reality of the spiritual warfare which had just occurred, as well as the fact that this miracle worker had just caused thousands of pigs to launch themselves off the cliff and drowned to death in the sea. So rather than asking Yeshua to stay and to teach them and to continue to work miracles for their sick and damaged, the crowds insisted that Yeshua leave their region altogether. Now, I want to point out this comparison. In Israel, when Yeshua ministered and performed miracles, the Jewish people all came running to see what was happening, because there was an expectation that when the Messiah came, there would be signs and wonders. And even though the Jewish leaders did not believe that Yeshua was the Messiah, and in fact accused him that his miracles were being performed under the power of the enemy rather than the power of God, the common people of Israel came running, wondering, hoping, desiring that this was in fact the Messiah. Now, they still desired he would free them from Rome, so eventually many of them would turn their back when he didn't do that. But they had all been hoping for the Messiah, and every time they heard of signs and wonders, they came running to see if it was real, to experience it for themselves. But in the nations, they didn't have that relationship with the Word of God. They didn't know what to expect of the Messiah because they weren't expecting the Jewish Messiah. They were disconnected from that reality. So when Yeshua performed signs and wonders in their midst, they became afraid and cast Yeshua out, away from them, rather than asking him to stay and to do more among them. Here's the question to ponder. Was their fear due to the potential for greater financial loss, or was it because they didn't understand the greater spiritual reality of what had just happened before them? There's an interesting comparison to be made here between the Jewish religious leaders' response to Yeshua and the Gentile Gerasene response to him as well. The Jewish religious leaders feared their power dynamic being shifted. They didn't accept Yeshua as Messiah, and they thought his signs and wonders were demonic rather than divine, as I said a moment ago. But on the other hand, the Gentile Gerasenes were terrified of the possible financial implications of Yeshua's presence and were terrified of his divine power, which they didn't understand but had just witnessed. But both wanted Yeshua gone from their presence. The Jewish leadership and the Gentiles and the Gerasenes wanted him gone because of fear of what his presence meant. At the request of the people, Yeshua got back in the boat and got ready to leave. The man he had just set free spiritually was begging for Yeshua to let him remain with him to become one of his disciples. Yeshua did not let the man go with him, but rather told him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much Adonai has done for you, how he showed you mercy." Now imagine the impact that this guy showing back up at home around his family and his old friends would have. They knew he was chained up somewhere, hiding in the tombs in a graveyard, fully possessed in a demonic state, or they assumed he was psychotic or something along those lines. Now he shows back up, clothed and in the right mind. Imagine the impact that's going to have when he begins to share what this Jewish guy from the Galilee just did for him. While it may seem on the surface as though Yeshua refused to let this man become a disciple, I would suggest that that is not exactly what happened here. Yeshua did not let him journey with him and the other disciples. This is not to say that Yeshua rejected his faith and service. Rather, Yeshua sent him to share with the Gentile world, of which he was a part of, all that the God of Israel had done for him. He sent this man to preach to the nations. Yeshua continually says through the Gospels that he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But this does not mean he did not minister to those of the nations. In fact, this account shows that he did. And he even sent this man to preach of the wonders Yeshua had done to the nations. And that is exactly what he did. He began to travel throughout the Decapolis and proclaim all that Yeshua had done for him. And all those who heard his message were amazed. He faithfully proclaimed his own testimony. And because of this, we can only imagine how many thousands of the nations would have heard the message of Yeshua, the promised Jewish Messiah, and long before the events of Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 15, excuse me, is where we see in mass those of the nations coming to faith and being filled in the Ruach HaKodesh. But long before Acts 15, we see this account where Yeshua specifically ministered to this Gentile man and then sent him to minister to the nations on behalf of the promised Jewish Messiah. Does it make sense? You see the imagery playing out there? Any questions, thoughts, comments on that first half of chapter 5? I know I went through a lot pretty quick there, but any questions or comments? Eliana, if you get ready with a microphone in case. Did you have something? If you'll bring the... No? Okay. I better not. That means it's juicy. Let's go. No. I imagine we'll have quite a few questions in the next section because that's where things get intriguing as well. And it's a story that most people are very, very familiar with because people love to teach on the woman with the issue of blood. And somehow we still often miss such intricate pieces and details of that story that really matter to the overall narrative of what's happening there. So before I move on, just want to give time in case there are any questions or thoughts that you would like to share, and then we'll dive into the latter half. All right, beginning with verse 21, I'm going to read this latter half for context, and then we'll dive in kind of piece by piece through it. When Yeshua had crossed over in the boat again to the other side, a big crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came. Seeing him, he falls at his feet. He begs him a great deal, saying, "My little daughter is near death. Come and lay hands on her so that she may be healed and live." So Yeshua went off with him, and a big crowd was following him and pressing upon him. And there was a woman with a blood flow for 12 years, who had suffered much under many doctors. She had spent all she had without benefit. Instead, she grew worse. When she heard about Yeshua, she came through the crowd from behind and touched his garment. For she kept saying, "If I touch even his clothes, I shall be healed." Right away, the blood flow stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed from her disease. At once, Yeshua, knowing in himself that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples responded, "You see the crowd pressing upon you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept looking around to see who had done this. But the woman, scared and shaking, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in shalom and be healed from your disease." While Yeshua was still speaking, messengers came from the house of the synagogue leader saying, "Your daughter is dead. Why do you still trouble the teacher?" But ignoring what they said, Yeshua tells the synagogue leader, "Do not be afraid. Only believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, Jacob, and John, the brother of Jacob. They come to the house of the synagogue leader. He sees a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. After entering, he said to them, "Why make such a fuss and weep? The child didn't die, but is sleeping." They started jeering at him. But after sending all of them out, he takes the child's father and mother and those with him and enters where the child was. Then taking hold of the child's hand, he tells her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. And they were overcome with astonishment. But he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this. And he said something to eat should be given to her. All right, so back to the first couple of verses, beginning with verse 21. When Yeshua had crossed over in the boat again to the other side, a big crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus comes. Seeing him, he falls at his feet. He begs him a great deal, saying, "My little daughter is near death. Come and lay hands on her so that she may be healed and live." So Yeshua went off with him. A big crowd was following him and pressing upon him. So we're going to pause there. I want you to understand something, and I've talked about this before. You have a concept in biblical study called inclusios. And inclusios can be all over in fact, they are all over the place. An inclusio is where you have a story that seems to be important, and in a lot of ways is. But then right in the middle of the story is something else, kind of like Acts 15, right? People love to teach Acts 15 is about Peter and the unclean food on the sheet, meaning we can eat whatever we want. But Peter never eats, right? But that whole message about Peter and his vision with the sheet with unclean food is surrounded by a bigger message about Cornelius and his household of Gentiles wanting to know more about Messiah, and God telling Cornelius, go get Peter to come to your house to teach to you. And then Cornelius sends dudes to go get Peter, but Peter hates Gentiles and wouldn't go to them. So God had to get get Peter's heart softened towards Gentiles before these guys showed up at his door, right? So then Peter has this vision, has this encounter, never eats. As soon as he argues the third time, the sheet goes away. There's a knock at the door. Peter goes, oh, this was what this was about, and leaves with them. And then the rest of the chapter deals with Cornelius' house again. So Cornelius and his house was a big part of the story, but that meat that everybody teaches out of context, which is Peter and his vision, had nothing to do with the meat of the animals upon the sheet, which Peter couldn't have eaten, didn't eat, and God removed before he had a chance to eat. It had to do with Gentiles. God was saying, don't call anything I've made clean unclean, and Peter immediately at the knock at the door understood that what God was talking about was Gentiles, not pig and shellfish and whatever else that's unclean. So here we have a major inclusio. You have the story of Jairus' daughter who's on her deathbed. Yeshua's on the way there. And then in the middle of that, we have the story of the woman with the issue of blood. And then after the woman with the issue of blood, we're back to Jairus' family again, right? All of this ties together. It's all important pieces of the puzzle, but there's a bigger picture being drawn out of the fact that the story of the woman with the issue of blood is sandwiched in the midst of Jairus' daughter. So what we see here is Yeshua crosses back across the Sea of Galilee, and there's another large crowd awaiting for him, kind of status quo at this point. Jairus, one of the synagogue leaders, came and fell at the feet of Yeshua. Now, the term here that we translate to synagogue leader, excuse me, and I'm not going to completely bash the pronunciation, but it's a compound word in the Greek, synagogue being the root of one part of it, and the other part being a root that ultimately translates to the master or leader or orchestrator. And so we translate it to a synagogue leader. This was not a rabbi. A rabbi was a different position. So Jairus was not a rabbi, but was more akin to a synagogue president, as we think of today, or an administrator. He would have been responsible for organizing details such as who would lead prayer services, who would read scriptures during the services, and so on. It was a position of honor within the Jewish community. Verse 23 says, he begs him a great deal, saying, my little daughter is near death. Come and lay hands on her so that she may be healed and live. Jairus stood as a powerful example of the faith that all should have had in Yeshua. He didn't ask if Yeshua had the ability to heal. He didn't ask, if it's your will, could you do this? He asked Yeshua to come, lay hands on his daughter, and she would be healed. Jairus had complete and perfect faith that Yeshua could heal his daughter. Yeshua leaves with Jairus right away, and a large crowd followed them. It's safe to assume that they were wanting to be witness to the miracle that was about to occur as well. They wanted to see if Yeshua could in fact heal this little girl, or worst case scenario, if she died, could he raise her from the dead, right? Picking up with verse 25. There was a woman with a blood flow for 12 years who had suffered much under many doctors She had spent all that she had without benefit. Instead, she grew worse. When she heard about Yeshua, she came through the crowd from behind, touching his garment. For she kept saying, "If I touch even his clothes, I shall be healed." Right away, the blood flow stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed from her disease. And we're going to pause there. With verse 25, the narrative takes a bit of a dynamic shift along the way. A woman who's been bleeding vaginally nonstop for 12 years appears on the scene. She's seen every doctor she could, all of whom caused her even more suffering rather than relief. She also spent all of her finances on medical care, trying to find healing, all of which was to no avail, and which left her broke and her physical issues getting worse. The nature of her illness also left her ceremonially unclean, as she would have been considered a nidah, as per Leviticus 15. The blood flow would be akin to that of a period. What's the term I'm looking for that sounds nicer? Menstrual cycle. There we go. It would have been akin to a menstrual cycle, so she would have been a nidah, and she would have been considered unclean. So for 12 years, this Jewish woman would have been considered ceremonially unclean, could have never went to the temple, couldn't have interacted physically with other people. Her own dad couldn't touch her. Her siblings couldn't touch her, because if they had touched her, they would have been unclean for the day, not able to go to the temple, and so on and so forth. When she heard that Yeshua was coming through, she made her way through the crowd. This act alone would have been very difficult, as she would have had to avoid coming into physical contact with anyone, so as not to also make them ceremonially unclean as well. In the same sense that Jairus had perfect faith that Yeshua could heal his daughter, this woman with the issue of blood had perfect faith that Yeshua could heal her too. Verse 28 says, "For she kept saying, 'If I touch even his clothes, I shall be healed.' When she reached out and touched the hem of his garment, she was completely healed instantly. And she could feel that whatever ailment she suffered from had not only stopped bleeding, but had been completely healed and removed from her body." Now, there's a very complex reality happening here. First, she couldn't touch Yeshua physically, and she knew Yeshua was not supposed to physically touch her due to her being ceremonially unclean. So she couldn't just ask Yeshua to touch her and to heal her, as Jairus had asked him to do with his daughter who was sick. But she also knew that if she could just touch the bottom of his garments, she would be healed. What was it on his clothing that she would have reached for? His tzitzit. How do we know this? Because she knew the prophecy of Malachi 3:20, or 4:2 in a traditional English text, which says, "But for you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings." The Hebrew term translated as wings is from the root word kanaf. This is also the exact same word used in Numbers 15:38 regarding tying the tzitzit on the corners of your garment. Numbers 15 verse 37 says, "Adonai spoke to Moses saying, 'Speak to Bnei Israel, say to them that they are to make for themselves tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations. They are to put blue cord on each tzitzit. It will be your own tzitzit, so whenever you look at them, you will remember all the mitzvot of Adonai and do them, and not go spying out after your own hearts and your own eyes, prostituting yourselves. This way, you will remember and obey all my mitzvot, and you will be holy to your God. I am Adonai your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God." She reached out for his tzitzit because she knew it would not cause him to be ceremonially unclean as it would have if she had physically touched him or asked him to touch her. She knew without a doubt that there would be healing in his wings, in the kanaf, in the wings, the end, the corner of his garment. And she knew that that power would heal her if she could just get close enough to reach it. The tzitziot on the corners of the garment, on our talit katan, talit gadol, those corners are, it's not uncommon to hear them called wings. When we wrap them around somebody, it's like wrapping wings around them. It's the healing wings imagery that's used there. She was 100% aware of that prophecy. She knew that there would be healing in his wings, and so she knew that if she could just reach out and grab the tzitzit, right, the reminder of the commandments of God, the reminder of the Word of God, if she could reach out and touch his reminder of himself, the Word, the Logos made flesh, she could be healed. She didn't need him to touch her. She didn't need to touch him. She knew if she could just get her hand on his garment, on his tzitzit, she would have been healed. It was an act of complete and perfect faith. Pick up in verse 30. At once Yeshua, knowing in himself that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples responded, "You see the crowd pressing upon you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept looking around to see who had done this. But the woman, scared and shaking, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in shalom and be healed from your disease." Yeshua instantly sensed that power had gone out from him when the woman was healed. He stopped and asked who touched him. His disciples, being the wonderful guys that they are sometimes, got a bit sarcastic with them. "You see this huge crowd. What do you mean, who touched you? Everybody's pressing it on you. Are you kidding me?" But despite their attitude, he knew someone had felt his power and been healed, so he continued to look for who it was. Now, again, Yeshua is God. He is omniscient. He is all-knowing. He didn't need anyone to tell him who touched him. He wanted the person to be involved in what just happened. He wanted the person to be able to stand on her testimony. I believe in perfect faith that Yeshua knew exactly who it was. There was no doubt in his mind, but he wanted them to stand up and own what happened. He wanted her to come forward and to clarify what had happened and to share her testimony. She stood up, quivering in fear, but also knowing exactly what happened to her. She came before him, fell down on her face, and told him everything that had happened. While she was scared of the implications of him stopping dead in his tracks to find out who touched him, Yeshua responded to her in love and compassion. "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in shalom and be healed from your disease." The woman received both physical and spiritual healing that day. She had been tormented physically and socially, separated from everyone, living a life fully broken and painful. Yet in Yeshua, she found wholeness and healing. She also found shalom. And I want you to take this in and kind of chew on it for a moment. Jairus, the synagogue leader, comes to Yeshua and says, "My daughter is dying. Come and heal her." The woman with the issue of blood, who has been separated from everyone, including her family, for 12 years, comes to Yeshua, reaches out in faith, touches his tzitzit, is healed, and Yeshua turns to her and says, "My daughter, be healed." Does it make sense? I want you to think on that for a bit. Jairus wanted his daughter to be healed. Yeshua turned to this woman and declared her to be one of his daughters. He declared that she was his daughter and that she was healed. So we see this like language that patterns throughout that's vastly important to the overarching narrative of what was happening in the gospel message itself. Picking with verse 35. While Yeshua was still speaking, messengers come from the house of the synagogue leader saying, "Your daughter is dead. Why do you still trouble the teacher?" But ignoring what they said, Yeshua tells the synagogue leader, "Do not be afraid, only believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, Jacob, and John, the brother of Jacob. As it says, while Yeshua was speaking with the woman who had now just been healed, someone approaches Jairus and told him his daughter was dead. So Jairus comes and says, "My daughter is dying, come and heal her." This woman comes, Yeshua says, "My daughter, you are now healed." And immediately following, somebody comes to Jairus and goes, "Your daughter is now dead. He didn't make it in time to heal your daughter. Your daughter's now dead. Leave him alone." They say, they tell him that his daughter's dead. He doesn't need to bug the rabbi any further. The message was clear. She's dead and nothing else can be done for her. But Yeshua ignores their fear and doubt and gave two commands to Jairus. Do not be afraid, only believe. Do not be afraid, Only believe. Now, Jairus came to Yeshua with nothing but faith. He believed wholeheartedly that Yeshua could heal his daughter, and he had no fear. If he had fear, he would have been at home crying over what was impending. But rather, he went without fear to find Yeshua. Yeshua's message is clear. If he could have healed Jairus' daughter, could he not also bring her back from the dead? If he has complete authority over everything physical, natural, and spiritual, if he could have healed her, could he not bring her back from the dead? He only allowed a limited group of his disciples to accompany him. Particularly Peter, Jacob, and John were allowed to go and see the miracle with him. These three were also his inner circle out of the 12. Yeshua had a massive following. Huge. But out of that, he had 70 disciples. Out of those 70, he had 12 that were really close to him. Out of those 12, he had 3 that he considered like brothers. All of them were equal in his eyes. All of them were important. But these 3 had a certain special added kind of role that they walked in. Verse 38, they come to the house of the synagogue leader. He sees a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. After entering, he said to them, "Why make such a fuss and weep? The child didn't die. She is but sleeping." Now, this is important for you to understand in the ancient Near East culture, especially in Israel and Jewish culture. When somebody died, there were, and they were typically widows, and there were people who were paid to come and mourn for you. That was how they earned their living. They would come and weep and wail. So as soon as somebody died, there was a crew of people that would show up just to mourn for you. They didn't necessarily have any relation to you. They didn't necessarily care if you were alive or dead. But this was how they made their money, and this was part of culture, that there was this mourning that went on. You didn't want the family to mourn alone. You didn't want them to be ostracized, so everybody came about, and there was this whole thing. And so here's what happened. That's why instantly there were all these people there mourning. Jairus' home, they arrived at Jairus' home. A group of wailers had already assembled, mourning her loss. Yeshua told them to stop mourning, for the girl was only asleep. It is likely that by this imagery, Yeshua was teaching that death is temporary, a temporary condition like sleep itself. We know that in the end, the dead will rise in Messiah. It's also important as we look on, verse 40 says that they started jeering at him because he told them to stop weeping. They start jeering at him, but after sitting all of them out, he takes the child's father and mother and those with him and enters where the child was. Then taking hold of the child's hand, he tells her, "Talitha ka'um." I want you to understand something too. He shouldn't have touched her because you're not supposed to touch a dead body. So it's important to understand the woman didn't want Yeshua to touch her because he was afraid that she would make him unclean. But remember, Yeshua also touched a leper and heals him, but he wasn't supposed to touch a leper. So there's a lot of pieces going on here, right? If Yeshua wanted to, if she had asked him to, she could have easily said, "Yeshua, if you would turn and touch me, I will be healed." But instead, she had enough faith in the power of Yeshua that she didn't even ask for it. She just reached out for it, right? So I just want you to see this imagery. Yeshua, for sake of ceremonial cleansing, should not have touched her, but could have touched her and healed her. Just as he should not touch the dead body, but is about to touch the dead body and raise her. Just like he shouldn't have touched a leper, but he touches a leper and heals them. Yeshua took Jairus, his wife, and Peter, Jacob, and John with him to the room where the girl was at. He took her by the hand and in Aramaic said, "Talitha ko'um," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." "I say to you" is a declaration of Yeshua's authority. This is a sample of someday in the future when Yeshua will call all people from the grave. Immediately the girl rose up, began to walk around. The text also tells us that she was 12 years old, which is the length of time that the woman with the issue of blood suffered. The notation likely emphasizes the difference between the woman and the girl. The former had 12 years of misery. The latter had 12 years of happy childhood. Yeshua gave 2 commands. First, that they not make what had happened known so that more people didn't come to him for the wrong reasons. And 2, that he commanded that they give the girl some food, showing compassion for this girl whom he just raised from the dead. Now, when we look at this text, we see all of these little intricate pieces that come together, right? You've got the man of the Gerasenes, the guy with the demon named Legion that's afflicted him for years and years, and now he's completely free, and now he's going and sharing testimony of what God has done for him. You go into the second half of the story, and now you've got the girl that's dying, Jairus, the synagogue leader. While the religious leaders rejected Yeshua, here's the synagogue leader running to Yeshua saying, I know who you are. I know what you can do. Will you come and do it for me? He had perfect faith in Yeshua's power and his authority and his ability, perfect faith. And he went and asked. Then you have the next story that feeds right in the middle of it, of the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years, who also has perfect faith. If I could just reach out and touch his garments, I will be healed. And she does, and she is. Both are accounts of perfect faith. Both are different ways in which we approach that faith and approach God with that faith. But both are very important. But then you also have this intricate kind of interweaving of the age of the little girl in juxtaposed against the number of years that the woman with the issue of blood had been suffering. And I imagine, and this is just me kind of eisegetically looking back at the text through 21st century eyes, I imagine that what the woman was dealing with was probably something akin to the pain of endometriosis mixed with a hormonal imbalance causing her to continue to bleed over and over again, nonstop, day after day after day, year after year after year. It would have been horrendous and torturing, especially in first century Israel, first century temple Judaism. She would have been wholeheartedly and completely separated from everyone and had no interaction with anyone for 12 years. Nobody would have had anything to do with her. But she had the faith. She heard this guy was coming who might be the Messiah. She heard of all the things he had done, and she had the faith that if I could just reach out and grab his wings, his kanaf, the corner of his garment, I would be healed. Jairus, the synagogue leader, despite everything he heard from all of the whack jobs of the religious leadership who kept saying, oh no, everything he's doing is demonic, everything he's doing is this or that, he's not the Messiah, he's a false teacher, he's not even this, he's that. With all of that going on, Jairus goes, no, I know who this guy is. I have perfect faith. I'm going to ask for his work in my daughter's life, for his healing in my daughter's life. It's mind-blowing seeing the intricacy of this story. And again, as I've said before, the Gospel of Mark is fast-paced, right? Every chapter we go through, it's moving and moving and moving and moving. It's not quite like Luke, where he's detail-oriented, where he's fixated on the intricate pieces of everything and telling every bit. You know, Luke will run through an entire story from the beginning all the way to the end. In Luke, we see early in Yeshua's life a bit. We see some of his early ministry. We see expounding upon that. We see the death, burial, resurrection of Yeshua and expounding upon that. Even when we go into Acts and we see the journey of the message of Messiah out from Jerusalem, there's exponential information there. Right? We even read of the story of Paul, who's in this upper room somewhere in some building, and he's teaching all night long for hours on end. Some dude is like locked in listening and then gets tired, falls asleep, falls out the window, and dies. And Paul goes out and heals him and then goes back in to teach again. Resurrects him from the dead, goes back in to teach again. Right? It's not really a big part of the story, but Luke puts it in there. It's kind of interesting. I think it's kind of funny to read the way. There's a couple of things with Paul that I think are funny in Acts. Like, you know, he's preaching in one town. They get mad at him. They drag him out of the city. They stone him, leave him for death. Most of us would go, well, it was fun. I'm going. I'm going to find somewhere else. They didn't like me here. No, he gets up. He dusts himself off. He goes back in again. Didn't even give himself time to heal. They thought he was dead. He got up, cleaned himself off, and went back in and started all over again. Right? I think there are bits of the expounding narrative in Luke's writings that are very intriguing and interesting that I find somewhat humorous sometimes, but in Mark you don't get a lot of the expounding. Mark's gospel is all about, let's show you the authority, the power, the might of who Yeshua is. And we're going to go from one point to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's like, I said it early on in the first week, it's like the ADD gospel. It's just squirrel, 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 always chasing after the next one. But this particular part, especially this latter half of chapter 5, is so important, so interesting to see. If we have complete and perfect faith in who Yeshua is and his power and authority over all things physical, natural, and spiritual, his power is fully available to us, fully accessible to us. That's the heart of what we read here. Any questions, thoughts, comments on chapter 5? Somebody asked online, did Yeshua sin for touching the leper? No, the only way Yeshua would have sinned in that account is if he had touched the leper and then gone straight to the temple. Because he had touched the leper, his touching the leper made the leper clean instantly. So then we get into kind of some ambiguity on how it all falls at that point. But at the very base level and understanding Torah, because he touched the leper, there would have been a period of time where he would have been considered ceremonially unclean. Ceremonially unclean does not mean sinful, right? A woman giving birth to a child is ceremonially unclean for a certain period of time. Certain period of time for a male child and a longer period of time for a female child. That doesn't mean that giving birth is sinful. It just means you're ceremonially unclean to go to the temple. You have to go through a cleansing process before you can step into the holiness of where the presence of God resides. Now, presence of God is everywhere, so we don't somehow lose our holiness because of these natural things, but there is that intricacy that goes into it. So no, Yeshua would not have sinned. He just would have been ceremonially unclean for a period of time and unable to enter the temple because of that. But like I said, had he touched the leper and then immediately ran into the temple, that would have been sinful, because sin is rejecting God's ways, and that would have been a rejection of God's. But Yeshua can't do that. Yeshua cannot sin. He cannot reject God's ways. He cannot work against his own word, which was breathed through him. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? If not, we will go ahead and close out with prayer this evening. Avraham, Father of mercies, we worship you, Lord. We thank you for this time together. Father, we thank you for the truth of your word, for the fact that your word reigns true and is actively working in our hearts and our lives day in and day out, even now, 2,000 years after the death, burial, resurrection, ascension of Yeshua, the outpouring of the Ruach HaKodesh, and that it still remains true as a testimony of your faithfulness and of your love and compassion for your people, for your creation, and for what you promised you would do through your Messiah. Father, we ask that as we continue through the study in Mark, that you will continue to open our eyes and our hearts to the truth of your word, that you will continue to reveal deeper and deeper understanding to us, that we will have an even closer relationship to your word day in and day out. B'Shem Yeshua Mashiachenu. In the name of Yeshua our Messiah we pray, and everyone says, Amen.